Welcome back everyone to the second episode of Hellraiser. Today we're doing what's probably my second favorite horror movie, quite possibly, and that is Tobe Hooper's 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was directed by Tobe Hooper in 1974 and spawned a massive franchise, as you probably guessed. The original movie was a critique of the meat industry. And as someone who isn't a vegetarian, Jesus, this movie's final act makes me feel like I need a bath. It was sorta kinda half based off some Texan grave robbers who made furniture out of body parts. Not only is that exactly what the Sawyer family does in this movie, but in the opening scene it shows a so-called art piece made from a human body which was stolen from a grave. It's also really effective horror, one way being the fact that there is so much agricultural grossness. Like there's bones hanging around everywhere, feathers all over the floor, random pig squealing noises, a lot of descriptions of slaughterhouses in the first act, and the super dingy lighting towards the end. It's just a nasty atmosphere. The other way this movie makes you feel uncomfortable is the horrifying implied violence. Not very gory, quite possibly due to budgetary reasons, but the idea of this shit. Oh god. People getting put on meat hooks, people getting tied down while these hillbillies are doing this shit. This is just a mean family. So after a good couple of years the second one came out, and it strangely took more of a light-hearted comedic tone almost. It basically loses all anti-slaughterhouse imagery, and as someone who isn't a vegetarian but I really respect the message of the original, fortunately I think Texas Chainsaw 2 still works. It's not perfect and it's nowhere near as amazing as the first movie, but you know what? It's a solid time. I think the main character Stretch is probably a better character than any of the characters in the original. I quite like Franklin, but Stretch is just such a fun character with so much personality. This is a far more colourful movie than the original, which in the first act really works for me, but when we enter the Sawyer's weird underground funhouse, it starts to work a bit less for me. I don't know, maybe the setting in the last act just feels a little bit too goofy for me. Anyway, so a couple of years later we get Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. A movie which I used to tolerate, but upon rewatch, I just kinda can't stand it anymore. Originally, I found the first act of this movie incredibly boring, and the last act quite a bit of fun. Now I see it as the same, but the last act is just a complete mess. I don't know, it's just trying to change so much from the original timeline, but it's the same timeline. Like, this is still a direct sequel, but you can kiss the continuity goodbye from now. This is also one of the more boring looking movies. I like the Leatherface mask, it looks pretty good, but that's all I have nice to say about the look of this movie. The whole thing is just kinda lit weirdly. Overall, it's just not a great movie. And none of the movies after ever reached the height of the first two. Some really like the remake from 2003, but I just think it's okay at best. But anyway, this movie is about the original. We've already been recording for 8 minutes. This is going to be a long video. Like I said earlier, the opening of the movie is a radio story about some bodies that have been robbed. But before this, we get iconic imagery and sound design of the camera flashes. That sound effect will appear a lot in the sequels. So we're introduced to our main characters, Sally, Franklin, Kirk, Pam, and Jerry. Like I said, Franklin and maybe Sally are the only interesting ones here. That's pretty much the main problem I have with this movie, frankly. It's one of the only criticisms I can give. Anyway, they're on a road trip in Texas, and they find a hitchhiker, whose official name is the Hitchhiker. And he starts behaving pretty weird. He talks in depth about the process of cattle farming in slaughterhouses. He even shows Polaroids of dead cows. 1. Gross. 2. I hate the fact that he just has those on him at all times. After this, things escalate and he starts cutting into his own hand and decides it would be a good idea to take a photo of Franklin, and after Franklin didn't want to buy the Polaroid, he freaking explodes it with gunpowder. Oh, don't worry though, things don't slow down, because he then decides to cut into Franklin's arm for no reason, and yet he was still surprised when they threw him out the van. This event in real life will be traumatizing, and it's no different in this. I feel like a lot of slashers of the time would not mention the incident, and they would just have the kids brush it off after a few minutes. But it's actually a very important event, and they're really paranoid that he's followed them. Oh dear, if they only knew what was coming. So Pam and Kirk go to investigate a house to ask if they have fuel. And it's now when we see the Sawyer house. Kirk decides to enter, and we get a pretty iconic shot. He investigates some pig squealing noises coming from a room full of taxidermied skulls, and then we finally see the man himself. Leatherface. Can we just talk about the sound design briefly? I mean, the pig noises might seem a little random at first, but it's actually really effective and gives a really gross agricultural feel. And it only gets worse when Pam also decides to investigate, and we get the best set design of the movie. So many feathers on the floor, furniture and decorations made of bones and skulls, random chicken noises, and when she tries to escape, she's then grabbed and put on a meat hook, and watches who's presumed to be Kirk's body get chopped into pieces. Gross. Once again, basically nothing is shown here, but the idea is so horrifying that this scene's honestly hard to watch. So Jerry follows and is killed in a not as interesting way, leaving only 2 of them left. Never mind, Franklin just got chainsawed. Rip to the best character, I guess. If I had a drink, I'd drink out of respect. So Sally is chased through the woods with a chainsaw before she runs into a man who they saw at a gas station earlier in the movie, which I didn't mention because it wasn't as important, but looking back on it I probably should have. Anyway, whatever. This guy's name is Drayton Sawyer, but you won't know that until the sequel. And yes, you heard me right, Drayton Sawyer. Looks like we got ourselves another member of the family. So he kidnapped Sally and she's brought back to the Sawyers' dingy nightmare house. And now we see the full cast of Sawyers. The cook, aka Drayton Sawyer, the hitchhiker, aka Nubbin Sawyer, Leatherface, who is unnamed and now sporting an old lady attire, and Grandpa Sawyer, who's at a ripe old age of 137, who somehow stays alive by drinking blood. And before you say this is stupid and unrealistic, which it is, the whole grandpa bit is just supposed to be a dark comedy. No one takes him seriously. I have no problems with this character. I mean, look at this guy. How could you be scared of him? Look at the little dance moves. Anyway, so now we get what might be the most uncomfortable scene of the movie. The Pam meat hook scene might have something to say about that, but I think this one takes the cake. So they go into this dingy nightmare living room, and we watch as the Sawyers eat what is presumed to be human meat, as Sally is tied to a chair with human hands on her hands, and throughout this whole scene the Sawyers are laughing hysterically and taunting her, and Sally's screams are just not pleasant. Like, there is a lot of screaming in this scene. Marilyn Burns is a very good screamer. Like, they're proper blood-curdling screams. It's genuinely hard to listen to. Also, the close-ups are paired with gross agricultural noises, which is just kind of unpleasant. Eventually, they try and kill her, and she escapes. And we get a very iconic shot of Leatherface tantruming around with his chainsaw in the golden glow of the sunrise. So that was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. One of my favorite movies of all time, definitely. While some of the scenes border on being unpleasant, it's one of those movies where it's just so well done horror that you can't look away for a lot of it. It's one thing to just show a bunch of blood and guts, but to actually make someone physically uncomfortable while seemingly nothing much is even going on takes effort. The set was notoriously hard to work on, one because of the baking heat and also because there was rotting meat everywhere for set design, which people would then get sick. Also, a lot of the stunts were just kind of dangerous and not done with much protection, like the jumping out the window. Oh, and also the scene where Sally gets her finger cut to give the blood to the grandpa. They ran out of fake blood, so they actually cut her hand. I mean, yeah, it's just a little finger slice, but still, that's kind of gross. But either way, they made a damn good movie out of it, and with that, goodbye.